It was a day like no other, a day that would leave an indelible mark on everyone who witnessed it. Imagine, if you can, a picture-perfect morning, sunlight spilling through the windows, casting golden beams across the city. But there was something beneath the surface of this idyllic day, something that would soon turn the ordinary into the extraordinary. What could possibly happen when the former First Lady of the United States, Melania Trump, steps into a place where the very essence of society's struggle is felt most acutely? A shelter, a safe haven for those seeking refuge, but a place far removed from the polished world she once inhabited. What prompted her to visit this particular shelter that morning? What was her mission? Or was there one at all? It wasn't just the media frenzy or the flashing cameras, nor was it the public expectations that surrounded her every move. It was something deeper, something that no one could have predicted. No one could have anticipated the profound effect her presence would have, not just on the people there, but on the world beyond those walls. That morning, the shelter in the heart of a bustling city sat in quiet anticipation. For the residents there, each day blended into the next, filled with uncertainty, longing for better days, and hoping for a glimpse of something to restore their faith in the world. They didn't know it yet, but today would be different, as the hours passed. A sleek black car pulled up outside, the heavy sound of its engine purring down the street, cutting through the usual hum of the city. Eyes darted upward as the door opened, revealing Melania Trump, stepping out in a modest yet striking outfit. She wasn't there for a photo op, not exactly, though the cameras that soon followed made it clear the world was watching. But it wasn't just her presence that drew attention. It was the quiet strength in her walk, the solemnity in her gaze as she approached the shelter's entrance. The people waiting inside had no idea what was about to unfold. No idea that her visit would shift the very atmosphere of the space, transforming it into something more than just a building for the forgotten and the vulnerable. She was used to high-profile events, of course. She'd attended galas, shaken hands with dignitaries, and stood at the front of grand rooms filled with lavish decorations. But this was different. Here, there were no gold chandeliers or crystal glasses, just humble walls and quiet faces. And yet, as she entered, the energy changed. The air thickened with something intangible, almost as though a door had been opened, to something far greater than a mere visit from an ex-First Lady. What exactly did Melania Trump hope to accomplish here? And how would her presence ripple out into the world? What would she do, say, and experience in a place so unfamiliar to the life she once knew? Those who were about to meet her had no idea. But what they did know was that it was a moment they would never forget. As the doors of the shelter creaked open, the low murmur of voices filled the air. The residents, men and women, young and old from every walk of life, were used to visitors, though not ones of such high stature. Their lives, marked by hardship and fleeting hope, often intersected with political figures, but this was different. This wasn't a well-rehearsed charity event or a staged photo op. This was real. This was raw. Melania's first few steps inside were met with a hushed silence. She was used to being in the spotlight, but not like this. Not here, where the faces before her held more pain than power. The eyes that met hers were wary, expectant. A few even seemed skeptical. What was she doing here? What did she want? She was just about to take her place among the volunteers when the door burst open with a sharp bang. A young woman, perhaps in her late 20s, stormed into the room, her face streaked with tears and her hands clenched into fists. She was out of breath, her eyes wide with panic as she scanned the room. "Please, I need help." Her voice cracked as she spoke, drawing the attention of everyone around her. Melania froze. Something about the raw desperation in the woman's voice struck a chord deep within her. The crowd around them shifted uncomfortably, murmurs rising. The shelter workers, who had been busy tending to the daily needs of the residents, stepped forward, trying to calm the woman down. "I've been on the streets for days," the woman continued, her voice trembling with fear. "I have nowhere to go, no family. They took my children." Her words rushed out in a frantic flood, too fast for anyone to process fully. "I don't know what to do. I don't know where they are." The shelter staff tried to soothe her, offering her a seat, a glass of water, and assurances that help would come, but the woman's panic only escalated. The storm had already swept through the room, and now Melania stood at the center of it, uncertain of how to respond. Without thinking, she walked toward the woman. Her gaze was calm, but her heart raced. She knew that feeling, that helplessness. She had seen it in the eyes of so many before, the way it consumes you, turning your world into a frantic blur of fear. This was a crisis. It was the sort of crisis that could not be ignored or dismissed. The woman's words, her tears, her pleading. Everything about this moment struck Melania in a way she didn't expect. "Hey," Melania spoke softly, taking a step closer. She reached out, tentatively, as if the woman might recoil. "I'm here. I'm listening. Let me help." The woman looked at her, her face a mask of confusion and disbelief. Melania Trump. Here? Was she really offering help? The woman hesitated, her eyes flicking toward the shelter workers, then back to Melania. You can't help me. No one can." The defeat in her voice was palpable, and in that moment, Melania realized the depth of her despair. But this was the catalyst, the moment that would change everything for her. She had been sent here by some quiet inner force, not just as an observer, but as an active participant. She wasn't just here to smile for the cameras or sign a few autographs. She was here to do something real. "You're wrong," Melania said, her voice firm but gentle. "We'll find a way. I promise." The words didn't sound like a politician's empty rhetoric. They felt genuine. The room fell into a profound stillness as everyone, from the shelter workers to the residents, watched, in a mix of surprise and uncertainty. Would Melania truly be able to help? Could someone with her background really make a difference in a place like this? Behind Melania, a shelter worker named Maria, a woman in her mid-40s who had been working at the shelter for over a decade, exchanged a glance with another volunteer, signaling them to step in and provide the woman with some comfort. But Melania, without hesitation, locked eyes with the young woman in front of her, understanding the weight of this moment. This wasn't just about one person's crisis. It was about the bigger picture, about the larger struggle facing so many people who found themselves without a home, without family, and without hope. In that quiet, charged moment, the course of Melania Trump's day, and perhaps even her, future had changed. She wasn't just a visitor anymore. She was about to become part of something far bigger than herself. The young woman's emotional outburst hung in the air long after her words had faded. Melania stood in the midst of it, the weight of the moment pressing down on her. For a brief second, she questioned her presence here. She had entered this shelter, fully intending to do something meaningful, but now, in the face of such raw desperation, she wondered if she was in over her head. Maria, the shelter worker, moved quickly to calm the woman, offering her comfort, while another volunteer tried to coax her into sitting down. But Melania, still standing near the entrance, watched it all unfold. She felt like an outsider in this chaotic scene, her polished appearance suddenly out of place. She had come with the intention of helping, but the world of social services, of poverty, of broken families. This world was a far cry from the glittering events she'd attended as First Lady. A voice broke through her thoughts. It was Maria, looking at her with a mixture of curiosity and concern. "Ms. Trump," Maria began, her tone respectful but laced with caution. "It's clear you want to help, but this isn't something you can just fix with a few words. They've been let down by the system, by society. And it's not just about a single moment. It's about persistence, about showing up again and again, even when it gets tough. Melania's heart sank. She had never been afraid of challenges, but now the enormity of what lay ahead, the sheer complexity of these people's lives, their struggles, their trauma, was overwhelming. The people here were not looking for a quick fix or a moment of fleeting kindness. They were looking for hope, real hope, and no amount of good intentions could solve the deep-rooted problems they faced. She glanced back at the young woman, who had now been calmed by Maria's gentle words, but still had that haunted look in her eyes. The woman's story, the brokenness in her voice, haunted Melania. She couldn't just walk away from this, not now. But how could she stay when she felt so ill-equipped? What could she do in a world so complex, so far removed from her own? Her thoughts were interrupted by the loud crack of the door opening once again. A new group of residents had arrived, more faces, more stories, and Melania felt a rising sense of anxiety as she was thrust into this overwhelming tide. Each person carried their own weight of loss and uncertainty. How could she possibly help them all? A moment later, she felt a tap on her shoulder. It was Kevin, one of the shelter's coordinators, a wiry man in his early 30s with tired eyes and a nervous energy that seemed to reflect the constant pressure he was under. "Ms. Trump, we need to talk," Kevin said, his voice low. "There's been some pushback from the board. They're not too thrilled about your visit." Her stomach twisted. The board? Pushback? She had expected support, or at the very least neutrality. But the cold reality of the situation hit her like a slap. She was being judged, not by the people she had hoped to help, but by the very system that governed these shelters. "They don't like the publicity," Kevin continued, his eyes flicking nervously around the room. "Some of them think you're here just for a photo op. They don't see the long-term value of your involvement." A sharp pang of frustration shot through Melania. Was that really how they saw her? She was determined to prove them wrong, to show that this wasn't just a fleeting moment for her. She couldn't afford to back down now. "Then I'll show them," Melania said, her voice resolute. "I'm not here for the cameras, Kevin. I'm here because there's something real I need to do. I won't let anyone undermine that." But even as she said the words, a new wave of doubt washed over her. The board? The public eye? She'd always been able to handle the pressures of her position, but this felt different. She wasn't just facing a group of skeptical political figures. She was standing before a community of people whose lives had been torn apart in ways she couldn't even begin to understand. Kevin gave her a measured look, as if he could see the internal battle raging behind her poised exterior. "Just don't let them derail you," he said. "But you have to know, this isn't going to be easy." She nodded, though a sense of dread clung to her like a shadow. Was she really ready to step into this world with no guarantees? What would happen if she failed? Would anyone here trust her again? As the day wore on, Melania felt the weight of her commitment deepen. She was no longer just an observer. She had waded into the heart of something far more complex, far more messy than she had anticipated. And now, there was no turning back. The tension in the shelter had been building all day, a quiet undercurrent to the outward calm. Melania, determined to prove her sincerity, had spent the past few hours speaking with the residents, listening to their stories, and offering whatever comfort she could. But as the day wore on, the realization settled in. There was no easy solution, no way to make the pain of these people disappear with a few kind words or grand gestures. She had no illusions anymore about what she could fix in the short time she had. This was a long game, one that demanded patience, persistence, and most crucially, an understanding of the deep systems that had left these people behind. It was nearing the end of the afternoon when Melania found herself sitting in a small, dimly lit room in the back of the shelter. She had hoped for a moment of peace, but it seemed that the pressure was mounting. Kevin had been called away to handle another issue, and Maria had disappeared to deal with a family who had just arrived. Melania was alone, save for a few quiet souls milling about in the hallway. Then, unexpectedly, a voice broke the silence. "Are you Melania Trump?" The question came from a middle-aged man standing at the doorway. His face was weathered, his clothes worn, but his posture was unyielding, his eyes sharp. There was an intensity in his gaze that sent a chill down Melania's spine. "Yes," she replied, standing and brushing off her pants nervously. "Is there something I can do for you?" The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he stepped into the room, his eyes scanning her face. His silence felt heavy, like he was sizing her up, assessing her in a way that made her uncomfortable. After a long pause, he finally spoke again. "I've been watching you all day," he said, his voice gravelly but firm. "You've been walking around, playing the part of the concerned celebrity, the concerned first lady, all calm and composed. But let me tell you something." He took a step forward, and Melania instinctively stepped back, though she quickly regained her footing. "This isn't your world. You don't belong here, not really. You've been out there for years, living in luxury, and now you want to come in here and be a hero. But that's not how it works." The words hit her like a punch to the gut. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. He wasn't wrong. She hadn't known this world, not truly. Not like the people around her who had lived it, breathed it, and been broken by it. She had walked in with the best of intentions, but now, in this man's searing words, she felt exposed. What right did she have to be here? What right did she have to think that her presence could make any difference? The man's expression softened slightly, as if he could see her grappling with the truth of his words. "I'm not trying to hurt you," he said quietly. "But you need to understand that this isn't some charity event. These people are not your audience. They don't need a savior. They need someone who is willing to stand by them long after the cameras are gone." Melania's heart raced. His words cut deep, but they also opened something in her. He was right. She had been seeking a quick fix, a way to help without truly understanding the complexity of what she was walking into. This wasn't about looking good. It was about rolling up her sleeves and doing the hard work that wouldn't come with any applause or acknowledgement. For the first time since her visit began, Melania felt a shift inside her. It was as if a veil had been lifted. She wasn't here to play a part anymore. She was here to listen, to learn, and to show up, no matter what came next. The man watched her for a moment longer, and then, to her surprise, he nodded. "Good luck," he muttered, before walking out of the room without another word. Melania stood there rooted to the spot. The weight of his words lingered, but instead of feeling defeated, she felt something else, something unexpected. A surge of determination. She wasn't going to walk away, not this time. If anything, she had just been handed the key to what she needed to understand. It wasn't about solving their problems in one day. It was about being present, about earning their trust. Her journey here wasn't over. In fact, it was only just beginning. The shelter was more chaotic now than ever before. News of Melania's visit had spread, and while some had welcomed her presence with cautious optimism, others were still deeply skeptical. The entire atmosphere was charged with a mix of curiosity, resistance, and uncertainty. But there was no turning back now. Melania had crossed a threshold from mere observer to active participant. And now, the stakes were higher than she could have anticipated. As the evening approached, a commotion erupted outside, followed by shouts and hurried footsteps. Maria rushed into the room where Melania was sitting, her face pale with worry. "Ms. Trump, there's a situation outside. One of the residents, David, he's gone missing. He's been having some serious mental health issues, and the staff lost track of him when we were trying to make arrangements for him tonight," Maria said, her voice strained with urgency. Melania's heart sank. David was one of the men she had met earlier in the day, quiet, withdrawn, but with a deep pain in his eyes that she hadn't been able to shake. She didn't know the full details of his struggles, but she had seen how fragile his mental state was. The thought of him out there alone and vulnerable in the streets was terrifying. "I'll help," Melania said quickly, standing up from the table. Maria hesitated, her eyes flicking with disbelief at the sudden resolve in Melania's voice. "You don't need to," Maria began, but Melania cut her off. "I can help," she repeated, her voice firm. "I'm not going to let him slip through the cracks." And with that, Melania marched out of the shelter and into the growing darkness. Her heart pounded in her chest as she stepped out into the streets, the cold air biting her skin. She could hear the distant sounds of police sirens, the muffled chatter of passing cars, but none of that mattered. The only thing that mattered now was finding David. She couldn't afford to waste time. Every second he was out there, lost in his own mind, brought him closer to danger. Maria had reluctantly agreed to let her help, directing her to an alley where David had last been seen. As she walked through the darkened streets, Melania's thoughts raced. How had she ended up here? Was she truly making a difference? Was this the kind of work she was cut out for? These were questions she didn't have the luxury of answering right now. The world wasn't asking her to perform for an audience anymore. It was asking her to be present, to confront the harsh realities, head on. And then she saw him. David was sitting on the ground, his back against a dumpster, his eyes wide and unfocused. He looked terrified, as if he didn't recognize the world around him. He was muttering to himself, his words incomprehensible, and his hands trembled as he clutched something close to his chest. "David," Melania said gently, kneeling beside him. He looked up, startled, his eyes meeting hers with a flicker of recognition. Who are you?" His voice was shaky, raw with confusion. "I'm Melania," she said softly. "I'm here to help. You're not alone." The intensity of that moment was overwhelming. It was the kind of raw human connection Melania had never fully experienced before. No cameras, no expectations, just two people in the midst of a crisis. She reached out, carefully, slowly, so as not to startle him. "It's going to be okay," she murmured, her voice steady despite the surge of emotion she felt. She wasn't sure if David truly heard her, but she could see the tension in his shoulders ease, if only slightly. Seconds felt like hours as she sat beside him, waiting for him to calm down. And then, when the worst of the panic seemed to subside, Melania did something she had never imagined herself doing in a million years. She pulled him into a quiet embrace. The moment was fleeting, just a few seconds, but it felt like a lifetime. She wasn't here as a celebrity, a political figure, or even a former first lady. In this moment, she was just a woman, offering solace to another human being who had nowhere else to turn. David's body relaxed against hers, his breath slowing. He wasn't cured, not by any means, but in that brief encounter, she had given him something no one else had in a long time, a sense that someone cared enough to show up. When the police arrived, they took over the situation, but Melania didn't leave right away. She stayed with David, offering him her quiet support until he was safely taken to a facility that could offer him the care he desperately needed. As the police drove off with David in the back seat, Melania stood there, her heart still racing, but her soul somehow calmer. She had come to the shelter expecting to make a difference in grand, sweeping ways. But it was in these small, intimate moments when the world felt stripped of all pretense, that she realized the true power of her presence. For the first time in a long while, Melania Trump felt like she was exactly where she needed to be. The days that followed David's breakdown were a blur of phone calls, meetings, and conversations with shelter staff. Melania had stayed in close contact with Maria and the other workers, checking in on David's progress and offering her support in any way she could. It wasn't just a one-time gesture, not this time. as much as she had initially been driven. By the desire to help, to fix things in an immediate, tangible way, she now understood the deeper value of being present. It was about showing up, consistently and meaningfully, in ways that didn't seek acknowledgement, but simply offered what was needed. David, fortunately, had been placed in a mental health facility where he could receive the care he needed, and, though the road ahead was uncertain, Melania took solace in knowing that, for now, he was safe. The shelter, too, had seen some positive changes in the days that followed her visit. Donations had poured in, yes, but more importantly, there was a new energy in the air, an energy that hadn't existed before. People were starting to look at the shelter not just as a temporary refuge, but as a community. And while that wasn't a change that would happen overnight, it was a shift in perspective that could have lasting effects. Melania had learned more in those few days than she could have ever imagined. She'd arrived with the noble intention of making a difference, but what she found was something much more humbling. A profound lesson in empathy, patience, and the realization that some battles are fought not with grand gestures, but with quiet persistence and genuine connection. Her relationship with the staff had deepened as well. Maria, once skeptical of her presence, now looked at her with a respect that hadn't existed before. In turn, Melania saw the tireless work of these individuals not as a means to an end, but as a calling, one that required not just expertise, but a heart open enough to carry the weight of so many broken stories. But perhaps the most significant change was within Melania herself. She realized that she had never truly known what it meant to show up for others without expecting anything in return. In the weeks that followed, she continued to visit the shelter, not as a high-profile figure, but simply as someone who cared. It was in these visits that she found a new purpose, one that wasn't defined by titles or expectations, but by the quiet moments of human connection that could change the course of a life. And then, one chilly morning, a note arrived for her at the shelter. It was from David. "I'm getting better. Thank you for showing me that people do care. I'll keep fighting. I won't forget what you did for me." Melania read the note, her hands trembling slightly, and for the first time she realized that she didn't need anything more than this small, simple moment of recognition. She didn't need the world to acknowledge her or even to understand what she had done. She had already found something far more important, a deep, unwavering sense of connection. As she placed the note in her pocket, ready to face another day of work and visits, she thought about all the lives that would continue to intersect with hers in small ways. And in that moment, Melania Trump finally understood what it meant to truly make a difference. Not by solving problems, but by being present, truly present, in the lives of others. And as she walked back into the shelter's warmth, the world outside didn't seem so cold anymore.